In order to tell the story of the Amiga computer, first we must understand the history and the heritage of personal computers and video games history, which one day would merge and coalesce together to form a machine light years ahead of its time. We begin all the way back in the latter part of the 1960s with major league recording equipment manufacturer based in Redwood City called Ampex. The company was established in 1944 by Alexander M. Poniatov, who emigrated from Russian Empire in the 1920s. Ampex had become rich from a series of machines designed to record sounds onto tape. It was based on the German magnetophone technology, thanks to a commission by Bing Crosby to convert the technology in order for him to pre-record shows live for the radio. Reel-to-reel tape recordings led to audio mixing desks and multi-track equipment, which led to groups such as the Beatles using that to release albums on Ampex tape. Work on the first video recording equipment began in the 1950s, so by the late 1960s Ampex had already pioneered the original VR1000 black and white, VR2000 colour and the VR3000 portable colour videotape recorders, or VTRs, with the VR3000 being so small it could actually squeeze inside a large suitcase. By 1968, Ampex were working on ways to store photos and documents as high-resolution video images on 2-inch videotape, known as the Videophile project. Amongst the team of the Videophile worked a number of people who would go on to found the video games industry. Perhaps you would say the godfathers, or perhaps the grandfathers of the Amiga. Nolan Bushnell, Ted Dabney, Lawrence D. Ammons, Stephen Mayer and Alan Alcorn, who was at the time working for the company as part of a college internship. Larry Ammons, Steve Mayer would eventually leave Ampex towards the end of the 1960s to start work on a military project, and so they found an electronics consulting company called Cyan Engineering. By the start of the 1970s, the sleepy south side of San Francisco Bay, which took in Redwood, Palo Alto, Mountain View, Santa Clara and Los Gatos to the south, as well as San Jose, and known locally as the San Fernando Valley, was beginning to attract interest from investors and people who had massive dreams to explore a brave new world of electronics which was emerging and in need of consumer technology. This was the birth of a new California gold rush which would attract people from all around the world and change that world forever. In January of 1971, the Syzygy partnership was organised by Ampex Videophile Information Systems Division research engineers Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney. Syzygy would become one of the world's first video games hardware developers, although at the time there were only 2 well-known video games in existence. The first, Tennis for Two, a 2-player tennis game, played using a programmable oscillator, and the second, Space War, programmed by 3 students at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, known as MIT, for the PDP-1 computer. MIT was the home of the experimental computer TX0, affectionately referred to as TIXO. TIXO had 64K of memory and operated at 18 bits. The downside being that it took the space of an entire room and was one of a kind. The PDP-1, installed at MIT in 1961, was developed by DEC and based on the TIXO. It had 18-bit technology running at 200 kHz. It came with a punch tape reader and writer and cost in basic form $120,000, which is equivalent to $1 million today. Several games were written for it, including Tic-Tac-Toe and Space War. Nolan Bushnell then visits the MIT campus and sees Space War for his own, so in March 1971 he decides to leave Ampex and join Nutting Associates of Mountain View, California, Nothing was an early coin-op manufacturer which operated west of the Mississippi, who had previously found success with a computer quiz system, which appeared in 1965 when Bill Nutting spun off the Knowledge Quiz prototype, which he developed from Edex Corp. Bushnell proposed a game just like Space War, made popular by the students in the late 1960s, and Syzygy would retain the rights to their game, and Bushnell gave Nutting Associates a license to build the cabinet for the computer space system in exchange for 5% royalty on the sale of each unit. In April 1971, Nolan gets to work on Computer Space, while Ted Dabney works on the project in his spare time, while still working at Ampex. In June, Al Alcorn joins Ampex Videophile Information Systems division as a full-time junior engineer, taking Nolan Bushnell's former office. In July, Ted Dabney leaves Ampex to join Nolan Bushnell's Syzygy team full-time, and in August the Computer Space project is made public. The prototype is done and work begins on production of what would be 1,500 coin-op units. Late in 1971, Intel released the 4004 4-bit CPU, the first popular processor in a long line of products, and the first CPU to mass market to use the silicon chip as a means to form a high-speed array of gates inside a small circuit casing. These were the silicon chips better known as integrated circuits, or ICs, or semiconductors. These use a thin wafer of semiconductive material which was usually made from silicon, known as a plate or a chip, which is where we get the name chip to describe integrated circuit packages. Silicon in component manufacture was nothing new and was used in the 1960s at the Fairchild Semiconductor R&D labs in San Jose, but Intel's new 740 kHz CPU would popularize the widespread use of the term silicon chip, and soon the Santa Clara Valley itself became known as Silicon Valley. In November, going into December of 1971, Nutting Associates shipped the Computer Space game, model number NA2010, originally a one-player version, developed by Syzygy Co., Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney. The final game operated using 74 TTL or transistor logic chips, mass marketed by Texas Instruments and National Semiconductor, which were very simple bipolar logic gates inside epoxy plastic, known as a dual inline package or DIP. DIPs were very popular standard electronics for generations, and this is where we get the word DIP switches, which are manual switches to control that technology. Computer Space therefore requires no microprocessor and no memory, the entire chip consisting of solid-state technology built into the DIPs. It was later featured in 1973's Soylent Green movie and can be seen in 1975's Jaws as well. Computer Space is a success and enough to establish Atari as a viable company, so Nolan Bushnell begins to scour the market looking for an idea for a sequel to his game. In May of 1972, on the 24th, Nolan Bushnell attended a public presentation of the Magnavox Odyssey machine in Burlingame, California. The Magnavox Odyssey came with 6 games, all designed by Ralph Baer, including roulette, submarine, and a variety of games based on table tennis, hockey and football, and later expansion packs featuring the Light Gun, the very first in existence, and a shooting gallery game, all developed by creator Ralph Baer. Ralph Baer was another grandfather of the modern video games industry, as the man who brought the world the very first home computer console, the Magnavox, was designed in Manchester, New Hampshire in 1968 with Sanders Associates. The Magnavox didn't contain any silicon chips. In fact, the design used basic logic circuitry. The machine came with a 160x200 resolution NTSC graphics mode, no audio whatsoever, and 192 combined bits of memory, 64 bits for the game code and 128 bits for the game graphics. All of the games were stored within the Odyssey, with the user inserting a cartridge to tell the machine which of the variants to play. Nolan Bushnell saw this technology during a demonstration of the product, as Ralph had decided to license out his invention to third parties, hoping to spread that into the market. Nolan interviewed him at length and discovered all he needed to know to make this technology by his own dedicated team. In June, he begins to design the electronics, and on June the 26th, Nolan Bushnell signs a royalty agreement between Bally Manufacturing Corporation, and they will manufacture the cabinets for the new game if Bushnell will agree to produce 3 more games for Bally in total. The deal is settled for the next day. June 27th, 1972, Atari Inc. is formed as the world's first video game software developer, as the software side of Syzygy. Later in June, Syzygy co-partners Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney establish a 1,700-foot square office location in partnership at the Cole Complex at 2962 Scott Boulevard, Santa Clara, California, where they start work developing a coin-op machine based on Ralph Baer's tennis game, which was itself arguably based on Tennis for Two. Around this time, in June, Al Alcorn decides to leave Ampex and joins the Syzygy team as an electrical engineer. Alcorn was the company's second paid employee, after Cynthia Villanova, later Cynthia Russell, who joined Syzygy as Nolan Bushnell's private secretary. Alan Alcorn is shown Ted Dabney's circuit design from the Computer Space game, and he uses it to create his own version of what would become Coin-Up Pong, with assistance from Dabney and Bushnell. In November, the Coin-Up prototype, for Pong, is ready, and Syzygy expand into a neighbouring 1,700 feet space at the Cole Complex at 2962 Scott Boulevard, Santa Clara, resulting in a total space of 3,400 square feet in which to manufacture Pong units for commercial sale. November 29th, 1972, in Andy Capp's Tavern in Sunnyvale, California, Atari Pong is released. The first coin-operated video game in existence attracts a lot of attention and is an instant success. So much so that the small coin box inside the machine has to be enlarged and then replaced with a paint can, and finally removed altogether to stop the coins from overflowing and jamming the machine. In January of 1973, Anthony F. Marincic joins Atari Syzygy as Secretary-Treasurer and Head of Finance. Marincic had previously worked for Fairchild and Hewlett-Packard and would help Atari develop a defining force in the industry. In February 1973, and in fulfillment of the June 26, 1972 royalty agreement between Bally Manufacturing Corporation and Atari President Nolan Bushnell, Nolan delivers completed designs for an asteroid and a fireball pinball game to Bally in Chicago. Bally then declined to produce either of the games, but instead put him in touch with their subsidiary company, Midway Manufacturing, which was based in Franklin Park, Illinois. This facilitates the historic agreement which enabled Atari Syzygy to produce coin-op video games for release through Bally Midway. In March of 1973, Atari Syzygy began national distribution of the coin-op Pong game with Bally Midway. At this point, Nolan Bushnell was Atari president, Ted Dabney was moved to Atari VP production facilities, and Al Alcorn was Atari chief engineer. Ted Dabney wanted to be less involved with the business, but it would take another year for him to leave Atari completely. On May the 1st, 1973, the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center, Xerox PARC, released the Alto computer, based on 4 Texas Instruments 74181 arithmetic logic units, which had a combined running speed of 5.8 MHz and could process information in 16 bits. The Alto had a unique portrait display, a keyboard, and 128 kilobytes expandable to 512 kilobytes of RAM. The CPU was basically an advanced calculator chip, which was one of the very first arithmetic logic units, or ALU, one packaged chips in existence, and went on to be used in calculators everywhere. The Alto was also the first computer to be built specifically to operate a GUI, graphic user interface, or GUI as it may be known, and is widely regarded as the very first true PC. Although not widely available to the public, the Alto would have cost around $100,000, equivalent to $500,000 today, with a high quality laser printer included for around the same price. The A4 portrait screen was designed so that what you saw was exactly what you got on the paper, leading to the coining of the term WYSIWYG to describe this process. What you see is what you get. Around 2,000 Alto systems were built in total, mainly to be installed in Xerox labs and other in-house purposes, so it never reached the mass market as we would see it today. In July 1973, Atari Syzygy by Cyan Engineering from founding engineers Lawrence D. Ammons and Stephen Mayer, who were former co-workers of Nolan Bushnell's from Ampex, and this became Atari's new research and development unit, Cyan Engineering, based in Grass Valley, which was located in Northern California's Sierra Nevada foothills in an old hospital building on a hill. The building was located in the center of a large piece of property owned by famous engineer and inventor Charles Litton Sr., who had died in 1972. The building was known locally as the Old Miners Hospital, named after the gold rush which first brought settlers to the area. Eamon would be director of Cyan Engineering. Mayer would be senior engineer to research a second-generation gaming system, and Atari would incorporate Cyan's name into their logo for a while. The company was later renamed Atari Grass Valley. In 1973, Atari engineer Harold Lee introduces budding talent on the scene Jay Miner to Nolan Bushnell for the first time. Jay was a calculator, wristwatch and computer chip designer at the newly founded Cinetech Inc., which was an American MOS semiconductor manufacturer founded in 1973 as a branch of the Fairchild Corporation. It would be some years before Jay was asked to work for Atari full-time. August 3rd, 1973. Nolan Bushnell is still keen to keep up pace with the Odyssey, and the idea of a colour Pong game becomes item number 6 on the agenda, held on this date, which can be seen in this document available at the Atari Museum. The next day, on August the 4th, Atari opens a new 30,000 square feet administrative and manufacturing headquarters at the Cadre Building, 14600 Winchester Boulevard, Los Gatos, California. So far they have produced 4 games including Pong and Space Race. Also in August, Steve Jobs joins Atari in the electrical engineering department, hired by Atari VP of Engineering Al Alcorn. Although Jobs and calculator wizard at Hewlett-Packard, Steve Wozniak, would one day take on the world, for now they were more interested in pranks and hacking the telephone network to receive free long-distance telephone calls. In January 1974, Syzygy breaks off from Atari and would operate as an independent company run by Ted Dabney, while the Atari coin-op company would still be run by Nolan Bushnell. In February, Al Alcorn, previously Atari VP Engineering, becomes Atari VP Research, while in March of 1974, Ted Dabney, co-founder of Atari, is worried of Pong clones taking over the market and takes lesser and lesser jobs and finally leaves the company and the computer business altogether. April 1974, Intel released the 8080 CPU, After the 4004 in 1971 and the 8008 in 1972, Intel had not been resting on their global success and developed the 8080, an 8-bit chip which could also perform limited 16-bit operations. The 8080 went on to be used in the MITS Altair 8800 project and the Sol 20 computer. Noticing the potential of this new technology, competing semiconductor firms like Fairchild and RCA began work on their own microprocessors, while engineers around the world applied Intel's new chips to just about every use imaginable. April 15, 1974, Magnavox Co. filed a patent infringement lawsuit in the US District Court against Atari Inc. and the Bally Manufacturing Company, claiming Arcade Pong to be a direct copy of the table tennis game designed and patented by patent holder Ralph Baer. And as the dispute raged on, Magnavox were subsequently bought by Philips and used the money to work on a second generation sequel of their own, the Magnavox Odyssey 2. In the summer of 1974, Atari started the design of the Darlene project, named after an attractive female employee at Atari, which would be their first attempt at a home computer console which will exclusively play Pong. When it was decided that incorporating all of Pong onto just a single chip could only be done by Harold Lee, they realised that Harold had actually resigned from the company, and so Al Alcorn called him up and settled a deal whereby Harold would design Darlene from his own cabin on top of a hill above Los Gatos, where he and his partner ran a Christmas tree farm. Harold took the design and drawings to Alan when they were ready, and Alan's wife Kate would wire wrap the circuit and make the prototype. In the fall of 1974, after several months, the prototype design was ready on the Darlene project to be checked for problems and stress tested, and for this Harold Lee turned to his friend from Standard Microsystems, Bob Brown. The first design was then incorporated into one chip for a home Pong machine. In November, Intel's 4004 and 8080 lead programmer Federico Fagin leaves to form his own company, Zilog. The Z80 chip will incorporate the 8080 and the Intel 6800 chipsets and use just 5 volts of power. In January 1975, the Altair 8080 is launched by Micro Instrumentation and Telemetry Systems, otherwise known as MITS. In kit form, the Altair was available for $439, which today would be $1,900, and assembled the price would be $621 US, which today would be around $2,700. The Altair came with a 1024 word memory board populated with 256 bytes, although 4096K of memory was available on an expansion board which came later. The machine used an 8-bit Intel 8080 chip released the previous April, and this often is cited as the computer which sparked the trend towards downscaling technology to the size of a microcomputer and made future investments of microcomputing technology possible. It sold through radio and electronics magazines exclusively as a mail-order product, and MITS, who were based in Albuquerque, New Mexico, were flooded with orders. The machine sold 5,000 by the end of that summer, and the Altair staff expanded their small team to almost 100 employees. Unfortunately, the Altair suffered from one major drawback, in that it was practically useless. Its series of lights and switches produced nothing in the way of entertainment, and you couldn't write your grocery list on it either, so the machine was more of a curiosity than a computer. Paul Allen and Bill Gates also heard about the Altair in January 1975 and contacted MITS offering to demonstrate a new operating system for the machine. In fact, the boys had neither an operating system or an Altair at that time, and instead wrote a basic 4K basic interpreter using an Intel 8008 software emulator running on their Harvard's PDP-8 mainframe. The bluff paid off. At the first test, the software proved to be a success, so Microsoft got the job of creating 8K basic, extended basic, extended ROM basic, and disk basic for the Altair, as well as a large range of programming languages such as Fortran, COBOL and Pascal, before porting all of those to all of the other computers as they emerged onto the scene. Disk Basic eventually turned into the disk operating system known as DOS. Also in January 1975, a prototype of Atari's home Pong dial-in project is unveiled at the New York Toy Fair. Al Alcoin and Gene Lipkin are sent to promote it and to try to get the essential orders and the deposits they need from retail vendors. Tandy was the Walmart of its day, with Radio Shack stores all over the world. Tandy offered to take on the Pong machine, but thanks to clumsy handling of the affair, the Atari boys rejected the offer, which would have secured that deal, and returned to California empty-handed. In April, Bob Marsh, Lee Felsenstein and Gordon French start designing the Sol 20 computer for Processor Technology Corporation. The Sol 20 would use the same Intel 8080 8-bit CPU as the Altair, but would be designed to be usable as a computer. In the summer of 1975, at Atari, Gene Lipkin happened to call Sears at the last resort when trying to sell home Pong to the mainstream. The man he spoke to quickly turned up in his office. A demonstration was arranged for Sears at the top of the Sears Tower in Chicago, which went badly wrong, forcing Atari to rethink how they output TV signals and prompting Sears to promise to sell the new Pong console, even if it did directly compete against their other video game product, Ralph Baer's Magnafox Odyssey. In June, the MOS 6501 and 6502 is designed by the same team that had produced the Motorola 6800 CPU. A MOS chip is a metal oxide semiconductor integrated circuit which was produced lighter and faster and smaller ICs, and was designed by Chuck Peddle, Rod Orgill and Will Mathis. August 19, 1975, the MOS Technology Group had moved to newly formed MOS Technologies Valley Forge headquarters in Norristown, Pennsylvania. Motorola Fabrications had also moved from Arizona to Austin, Texas, leaving scores of ex-Motorola employees to weather a year-long recession in the semiconductor market. And most of those actually turned to MOS and got jobs at MOS Technologies. Between the 16th and the 19th of September 1975, at the Western Electric Show and Convention known as WestCon 75, MOS Technology introduces the MCS 6501 and MCS 6502 microprocessors. Chuck Peddle's goal was to sell the first run of 6501 and 6502 chips to the attendees at WestCon trade show in San Francisco beginning on September the 16th, 1975, at a price of $20 for the 6501 and $25 for the 6502. He arranged for lots of chips to be displayed in vast jars to show apparently the success of the company, although most of the chips on the bottom half of the jars were duds and fake chips. The ones at the top were of course there to sell to buyers. The gamble pays off, the show is a success and gets the new CPU noticed in lots of trade magazines. Motorola responded quickly and in October reduced the price of a single 6800 microprocessor from $175 down to just $69. As Motorola 6800 and MOS chips were largely compatible with each other, a price war ensued and almost broke MOS. Shortly afterwards, in September, Atari's Steve Mayer and Ron Milner principals of Atari's Cyan engineering unit secure a deal with MOS Technology, which would lead to Atari being able to use 6502 CPUs inside their latest secret project, a programmable video game console which actually did not have a name at this point. This was in a direct response to the Magnavox Odyssey 2 project, but the Odyssey 2 would not be released until December 1978 in Europe and early 1979 in the US, giving Atari time to beat their system to the market. Unlike the prior generation of machines which used custom logic to play a small number of games, the Stella at its core was a complete CPU, the famous MOS Technology 6502. At this point, Atari had manufacturing facilities in Japan, France and Brazil, and employed 500 people at its primary manufacturing facilities in Los Gatos, California, and another 30 engineers at its R&D think tank in Grass Valley in the Sierra foothills. On October the 1st, 1975, series release Telegames Pong by Atari, also known as Atari Pong C100, for 2 players, and this goes on sale for $99.95. In November of 1975, the Prega project is commissioned by Nolan Bushnell. Al Alcorn is assigned as the project manager and begins development at Cyan Engineering in late 1975, with Steve Bristow to create the conception and the design. Nolan Bushnell then hires Steve Jobs to create the prototype. Jobs is offered $750 when he claims he can produce Pong with fewer chips than the over 100 TTLs present in the original design, and an award for every chip fewer than 50 in the final design is offered. Jobs then asks Steve Wozniak to create the hardware, knowing Wozniak would create something better and cheaper than Atari's own lab, having begun designing computers for fun at an early age. Breakout is designed in just 5 days, and Bushnell pays Jobs $5,000 for it. Jobs pays Wozniak $350 and takes sole credit for the game. Atari are then blown away by Wozniak's concept and spend the next several months trying to understand and re-engineer it, and Atari's final design results in 100 TTL chips having to be used after all. While they wait for this process to happen, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak take a large amount of parts from the Atari hardware stores and secretly get to work designing and building their own computer, which would ultimately become the Apple I. On November the 19th, 1975, Atari filed for the registration trademarks on their Atari name that they stole from the game Go, and George Opperman's Fuji corporate logo, which they had been using since 1973. The Fuji logo is meant to represent 2 opposing players playing the game Pong. In December 1975, Atari ran an advert for Pong in Merchandising Week. When it comes to electronic video game excitement, Atari invented the game Pong. Also in December, at the Old Miners Hospital entered The Cure, that's Joseph C. The Cure, who joined Atari as microcomputer systems engineer, having been hired by Atari VP of Research Al Alcorn to work with Steve Mayer and Ron Milner at Atari's Cyan engineering unit. The Cure then named the whole project Stella after his Stella SX73 bicycle and got to work following Ron Milner's initial design model to build a functional gate-level prototype. Between the 7th and the 9th of January 1976, Atari introduced their home Pong console developed from their Pong on a chip, known as Porch, during the 4th annual Winter CES show, which was held at the Conrad Hilton Hotel in Chicago. Atari then offered a hospitality suite at the Continental Plaza, and the whole event was a huge success. With the Atari Pong and Sears Pong market sales combined, Atari is earning the millions. Also at the CES, Chuck Peddle, leader of the microcomputer system 6500 group at MOS Technologies and former member of Motorola's 6800 team, develops the MCS 6500 computer, otherwise known as the KIM-1. The KIM-1 is based on 1 MHz 6502 CPU. The basic KIM had 1 KB RAM, 2 KB ROM, a monitor, 123 key keypad, LED readout, cassette and serial interfaces, all for $245 US. This was a mail order only hobby kit computer rather than a microcomputer, and was often used as a training computer in order to learn how to program the 6502. Cinetech later produced their own variation on the 6502 design known as the SIM-1, which was designed by Ray Holt, who also designed the first microprocessor computer used inside an F-14 Tomcat. Chuck's team founded dozens of computer clubs so that those people who couldn't build KIMs could have access to the people who could, and the environment, coupled with a ridiculously cheap priced 6502 chip, kickstarted the second generation of home computer products. In February 1976, Atari Consumer Division offices and sub-assembly would move into a new facility at 1196 Boris Avenue, Sunnyvale, California, which was 31,260 square feet, located in Moffett Park Industrial Estate. Atari would remain at this location until after the buyout by Jack Tramiel in 1984. In February of 1976, Ron Milner and Joe DeCure have made their gate-level prototype for Stella and moved the development team to Atari's new Sunnyvale headquarters to finalise the design. In March, Cinetech, and prior to that Standard Microsystems engineer J.G. Miner, is hired by Atari VP of Research Al Alcorn to design a custom graphics chip and lead the further development of the programmable video games machine known as Stella, which would go on to become known as the Atari VCS. J. Miner was born in Prescott, Arizona on May 31st, 1932, at the height of the Great Depression. In 1950, he attended San Diego University in Southern California and then joined up with the Korean War effort, training for 6 months to become an electronics technician at the Navy's Groton Training School, where he met his future wife Caroline. He spent 3 years in the Coast Guard sailing in the North Atlantic Weather Patrol, where he helped to repair the radar, the ship radios, and even the captain's hi-fi. He then moved his new family to Northern California, where he completed a degree in electrical engineering at the University of California, otherwise known as Berkeley, in 1958, majoring in the design of generators and servo motors. During the 1960s, Jay found work in lots of small electronics startup companies, which were very open and relaxed places with very few rules. His first job required him to design a computer console with a video display for a science and lab work project, and this led to intensive research into circuit and logic design. Another break came in 1964 when he landed a job at General Microelectronics, or GME, a newly founded Silicon Valley Peninsula Semiconductor company set up by ex-Fairchild Semiconductor International employees who wanted to create a new computer using MOS chips. During this time at GME, Jay became an expert in MOS technology, reading manuals and all the books he could find on the subject until he knew it off by heart. Here he began to design the world's first MOS digital calculator and the world's first MOS digital wristwatch. GME was also the making of the small-scale integrated chips for NASA's satellites at the time, and Jay moved around several companies for years after GME was sold in 1966. This included a spell at Standard Microelectronics with Joe DeCure, and then in 1973 he helped found Cinetech with Bob Schreiner from Fairchild, which produced MOS chips. Atari would pay Cinetech for J. Miner's services, and Miner would remain a paid employee of Cinetech for the time being. Joe DeCure would continue development on the Stella project, now reporting to Jay Miner, who was now the new lead chip designer. In March, as the Zilog Z80 is launched, Motorola push a libel suit on MOS Technology for borrowing classified M6800 designs, when an MOS employee, Mike James, is found to have them in his office. MOS settled for $200,000 and agreed to stop production of the 6501 and return the confidential documents immediately. Motorola respond by slashing the wholesale price of their 6800 microprocessor to just $35, forcing MOS into serious financial difficulty. On the 1st of April 1976, Atari Breakout is finally released, and the Atari bosses are still withholding the bonuses owed to the staff. So Atari engineer technician Steve Jobs and Hewlett-Packard staff designer engineer Steve Wozniak, along with Atari chief draftsman Ron Wayne, decide to leave Atari and co-found the computer company Apple, where they continue to borrow funds on a 30-day deferment scheme and resources in order to build the circuit boards they need to release the machine. In June of '76, Processor Technology launches the Sol 20 terminal computer. It uses the Intel 8080 processor, but with a built-in video display module, the VDM1, to allow the machine to operate on the composite display monitor. The Sol 20 also came with the CUTS interface to store data to and from ordinary cassette tape. Lee Felsenstein from the Sol 20 team would later go on to develop the Osborne 1. In July 1976, Apple officially launched and mass marketed the Apple I computer, which sold for $666.66. It was designed and built in Steve Jobs' parents' garage and was sold as small mail order kits. The kits included a printed circuit board, a MOS 6502 CPU running at 1 MHz, 4K standard expandable to 65K of read-only memory, and a composite video output capable of a 40-column text mode or a 280x192 pixel monochrome graphics mode. Initially, the machine was given a mild reception, and the company founded in a garage continues to operate out of that same car garage, with Steve Jobs' sister helping out to solder chips onto the motherboards. But after several financial deals and negotiations, Steve Jobs finds the money to keep the company afloat by convincing investors to loan him enough stock to produce the machines and pay them back after 4 weeks. Jobs then made a deal with the Byte Shop, and they commissioned 50 fully assembled machines. Around 200 Apple I computers were eventually made in total, and the revenue went straight back into Steve Wozniak's next project, the Apple II. In October 1976, Warner Communications purchased Atari from Nolan Bushnell for the amazing sum of $28 million, which he sold in order to fund the launch of Stella, otherwise known as the VCS. Bushnell will stay on as the chairman and allow Warner's to manage and run the company. By October, the struggling MOS Technology Inc. are purchased by Commodore International. Commodore was founded in 1954 by the Polish business entrepreneur Jack Tramiel in the Bronx, New York, after years interned in German concentration camps during the Second World War left him feeling that the world owed him a favour. The story goes that upon leaving the prison camp, he ordered a meal at a local restaurant, which he then didn't pay for, and then realised that what the ruined city really needed was administration, and for that there needed to be typewriters. So he ordered a taxi, which took him to the people who made the typewriters, and they were so impressed that Jack had turned up in a taxi that the people immediately gave him credit on the spot. He then sold the typewriters on sale or return, and then he bought some more typewriters with the money he made from those and made some profit. By the 50s, Jack had earned enough money to emigrate to America, where he immediately joined the army for a term and then returned to open his own typewriter repair store in New York in 1953. He chose Commodore in 1954 because he wanted a name that sounded very important and top flight. General was already used by lots of companies, including General Electric, and General Motors were already chosen by other companies, so the next rank down was Commodore. The company would move to Toronto in 1958 and officially established themselves as Commodore Business Machines, or CBM, in 1960. At that time, CBM would invest heavily in office equipment and also in the manufacture of office furniture and filing cabinets. Canadian attorney and financier Irving Gould takes control of the company in 1966 to bail Commodore out of debts and a lawsuit for business malpractice, and this results in Jack investing in the production of electronic calculators, and despite taking advantage of all the latest technology, including programmable calculators and liquid crystal displays, Texas Instruments still managed to undercut Commodore in a 5-year price war, which saw Commodore's pocket calculator sales decline drastically. In 1976, Commodore opens a new office in Palo Alto, California. By October of 1976, 9 months after the launch of the KIM-1, MOS technology was almost broke. Jack Trammell thought it would be great to buy MOS Labs at this vulnerable time, and it would be the perfect way to attack Texas Instruments. To have his own fabrication lab, Jack turned to millionaire Irving Gould to lend him $3 million to purchase MOS. As a result of what Jack called vertical integration, Commodore would get first choice of the new products and the mass market of chips, forcing the cost of computer technology down drastically. This also meant that Commodore could use the new chips to develop their own line of computers, while they continued to produce the Commodore KIM-1 units over the next 6 months. The idea for a new computer came from a calculator salesman within Commodore who suggested an all-in-one package would encourage business users and hobbyists not otherwise interested in building their own computer. Commodore reached a deal with Radio Shack, who agreed to sell pre-assembled computers in a bid to undercut rivals The Byte Shop. Chuck Peddle was also one of the first 3 to see the Apple II prototype, and this almost led to Commodore selling the Apple II. In the meantime, Chuck Peddle was put to work to design the first of Commodore's new computers, which will become the Commodore PET. In November 1976, the Fairchild Channel F, now renamed from the Video Entertainment System, is the world's first CPU-based video game console released by Fairchild Semiconductor for $169, which was actually equivalent to $700 in today's money. It sold 250,000 units in its lifetime and was the first second-generation computer. This meant the computer had a CPU, with games being based on microprocessor code rather than jumpers and discrete logic. The Fairchild VES introduced the cartridge-based game code storage format, and when Atari realized that their VCS, their next project, was immediately in line with the VES, Fairchild quickly renamed it to the Fairchild Channel F instead. Motorola also saw the success of the Fairchild as direct competition into the home market and hired many Fairchild staff to join their team. In January 1977, the CBM PET, the Personal Electronic Transactor, Model 2001, is introduced for $795. The PET featured a combined terminal design with integrated cassette drive, a keyboard and a 9-inch monochrome VDU, with a case made from bent sheet metal thanks to the manufacturers of Commodore's office filing cabinets, based on 1 MHz 6502, which ran 4K of RAM and 40-column display. The original 2001 model is the only one to feature a built-in cassette interface, An updated 4032 version was released in May of 1980 with 40-column mode and 32K of memory, along with an 8032 model with an 80-column display for $1,295. In January, RCA, otherwise known as Radio Corporation of America, released the Studio 2 console, another contender in the crowded second-generation home video console market, for $149, which is equivalent to around $600 today. The Studio 2 had an RCA 1802 CPU clocked at 1.78 MHz, 2 kilobytes of ROM to house the 5 built-in games, and 512 bytes of RAM, and used an RCA 1861 Pixie video chip to produce a 64x32 pixel monochrome graphics display. The 10-button dual keypads were unwieldy, and the success of the Fairchild Channel F made it obsolete before it even hit the stores. Games included Space War, tennis, baseball and blackjack, but the machine only sold a few 100,000 units. In January of 1977, Apple finally moved out of Steve Jobs' parents' garage into a Palo Alto rented office space at the Good Earth offices, 20863 Stevens Creek Boulevard in Cupertino, California. This is where they will expand, develop and ultimately release the project known as Apple II. In April, Warner Communications invest $100 million in Atari Inc. to develop Stella. The project is now well into development, but will take another 2 months to complete the design and test it before production begins. In June, Apple Computers launched the Apple II computer for $1,298 with 4 kilobytes of RAM, or 2,778 with 48K. The Apple II uses the MOS 6502 processor clocked at 1 MHz, a 6-color display, composite video, ports for cassette interfaces and disk drives, and ships with WAS Integer Basic built into the ROM. It works, and soon Apple are taking on staff to cope with the demand for their new machine. Apple also designed their famous Apple logo around this time, which the company used until 1999. In June 1977, the Atari project Stella is now renamed as the Atari Video Computer System, or the VCS, and the prototype design is now complete. In the summer of '77, the Cyan research team in Grass Valley that had recently finished the Atari video game console now had the hard work of developing Stella to give it high resolution graphics and the ability to display character graphics and fonts. They also wanted to add a keyboard with function keys to emulate what home and business users wanted. A brand new project was set up, and the designer would be Jay Miner, with hardware engineering by Joe DeCure. DeCure got to work creating the new serial I/O chip known as SIO, which would intelligently locate and process data to and from peripheral devices such as disk drives and printers. Joe DeCure later expanded this technology into the Universal Serial Bus, or USB, which he patented much later whilst working for Microsoft, which has become the de facto connection bus for almost every modern computer device today. The new project was called Colleen, and it would eventually lead to the Atari 400 and 800 machines. In August 1977, the Tandy TRS-80 Mark I is released. The Mark I, as well as the Models 2, 3 and 4, and a proposed Model 5 used the Zilog Z80 chip, the same as much later Z80 and Z81 Spectrum computers. The TRS-80 contained a Zilog Z80A clocked at 1.77 MHz, 16K of RAM, and came with a 12-inch monochrome monitor to display 64 columns by 16 rows text, retailing around $600. The TRS-80, the Commodore PET and the Apple II are what Byte magazine would dub the 1977 trilogy, and these machines set the standards for home computing technology. After much manufacturing and preparation, on September the 11th, 1977, Atari launches the VCS in America for between $170 to $199, which is around $677 in today's money. The VCS was a rebadged Sears video arcade machine known as the SVA. Like the Fairchild Channel F, the system logic is stored inside cartridges which can be removed and replaced. It uses an 8-bit MOS 6507 processor running at 1.19 MHz with 1 to 8 bytes of internal RAM and 4K ROM. 30 million Atari VCS machines are sold during its production run, and after 1981 the machine was renamed again as the Atari 2600. In October 1977, Atari's former manufacturer Bally released the Bally Astrocade for $299, which is equivalent to over $1,000 in today's money, and this was directly to compete with the VCS. The Astrocade is another second generation machine with a cartridge slot and a Zilog Z80 CPU. It was launched as the Bally Home Library Computer when it was released in 1977, but available only through mail order. Delays in the production meant none of the units actually shipped until 1978, and by this time the machine had been renamed the Bally Professional Arcade and later the Astrocade. The console disappeared a short time after the 1983 video game crash, along with many other machines. In February 1978, International Business Machines Corporation (IBM) launched the IBM 5110, the 5110 portable PC. It cost $10,225, that's $37,522 in today's money, and weighed in at a hefty 43 pounds, which is 19.5 kilograms in weight, not including the tape inside the tape drive used to load it with commands. The unit plugged into an external monitor, or the user could hunch over a 5-inch monochrome monitor built into the machine, witnessing 64-column times 16-row display. It is fair to say that after the dreams of Sir Charles Babbage had long since passed, nobody really wanted a mechanical adding machine to calculate logs and tables, which human computers had done for millennia. That was until New Yorker and MIT instructor Herman Hollerith invented a punch card machine to tabulate the 1890 national census, based apparently on the way attendants on the railroads punched tickets to verify the passengers. The Hollerith electric tabulating system became the Computing Tabulating Recording Company, and later International Business Machines in 1927. After the war, and after they saw ENIAC and UNIVAC, IBM released the 701 in 1953, known as the Defense Calculator, which took up an entire room, and only 19 were ever produced. A long series of adding machines then followed, each becoming heavier and more expensive than the last, with each having about as much basic computing power as a modern cash register. The 5110 proved that the company had not advanced much further than diode technology, and this will not be the last monster or the heaviest in the long line of dinosaurs which IBM were known for. Also, February 78, Raymond Kazar is hired as president of Atari Inc.'s consumer division by new owners Warner Communications. After an argument during a board meeting the previous November meant Bushnell was demoted again, this time from chairman to director, and former president Joe Keenan became the new chairman of the board. On June the 9th, 1978, Intel introduces the 8086 microprocessor. It uses 16-bit registers, a 16-bit databus, and 29,000 transistors to deliver 4.77 MHz of power, all inside a single 40-pin DIP package. The CPU was used in a range of computers, including the very first Compaq and the 1978 Xerox Note Taker. This was the 22 kilogram successor to the Xerox Dynabook and used 5 MHz 8086 chips for its chipset and came with 256K of RAM, a floppy drive, used a mouse and had stereo speakers, was Ethernet compatible and used a 7-inch built-in monochrome touchscreen which ran the Smalltalk operating system. Only 10 prototypes were ever built, which cost $50,000 each. Also in the summer of 1978, Apple moved into a new corporate headquarters at 10260 Bandley Drive in Cupertino, California. This is a much larger space than their previous headquarters at Stevens Creek Boulevard, and as you can see, the staff had fun carving up the area into units, placing Steve Jobs in the farthest corner and imagining a tennis court in one section, which was eventually used as a storeroom. On October the 18th, 1978, with Apple II now in profit and relocated into their new office, Steve Jobs and Trip Hawkins produced a one-page memo entitled Lisa Proposal No. 1, which was a new computer named after Steve Jobs' daughter Lisa, which is largely ignored until the summer of 1979. Also in late 1978, work begins on Sarah, the codename for what will be the Apple III computer, headed up by Dr. Wendell Sander. The computer is named after his daughter Sarah, and the Sarah is a direct successor to the Apple II and will ship with a new operating system, Apple's sophisticated operating system known as SOS. In November of 1978, amid rumours of Atari's successor to Stella being almost ready, Atari Inc. co-founder Nolan Bushnell is forced out of the company after a dispute with Warner's over the future of Atari, and Ray Kazar becomes the new Atari CEO. Nolan thought that the production of the VCS 2600 should end before the introduction of the new machine. Warner's refused. In fact, the VCS was discontinued 14 years later on January 1st, 1992, having sold those 30 million units. Bushnell also thought that the closed in-house game development strategy was not working and they should license games development to third parties. Warner's refused, but made sure that his outbursts led to his dismissal. In December 1978, the Cyan Group present their plans for Stella 2 to Atari. Atari announced 2 new machines to the public, a low-end version known as Candy and a higher-end machine known as Colleen, named after 2 attractive Atari secretaries. The primary difference between the 2 models was marketing. Atari marketed Candy as a games machine and Colleen as a computer, and although the Colleen came with a keyboard, internally they were very similar. The machines were actually advertised under these names, but later they were renamed the Atari 400 and the Atari 800.